Hi, everyone. I'm Nicky. I'm very aware I'm the last speaker between us and the networking mixer and the drinks and the food. So I'm going to make this worth your while. I'm going to be speaking today about making decisions, but I'm not going to be speaking about making team decisions, about facilitating discussions, about building consensus, all of that kind of stuff. We'll touch on it in a few places, but that's kind of a whole other talk. Today, this talk is all about you, about your mindset shift. Because by focusing on yourself first, you can lift up everyone around you. Okay. So I'm going to start with a visual guide into my entry into leadership. So when I started managing teams, I didn't realize it was going to be quite such a roller coaster. And honestly, at various times, I have felt like all of these people. My first day, feeling pretty good, kind of important, a little bit excited. But before very long, I was slightly less excited, kind of maybe a little bit terrified. Because in quite a short space of time, suddenly I had gone from feeling like, great, I get to make all these decisions, to, oh, great, I've got to make all these decisions. And then even worse, sometimes I felt like this person, with their head in their hands, thinking, oh no, I have made a very bad decision. And this is not a great place to be hanging out, right? Because it feels bad to be wrong. It feels bad to make mistakes. It feels bad to make the wrong decision. It's one of the things I find most stressful about work and life in general. When you get that sinking feeling, like something is not going well. So I wanted to share some of the things that I've learned on the way that have got me to this place where I might not always make exactly the right call every time, because that's impossible. But I got to a place where I'm happier because I've got solid foundations, good processes, and I'm considering the right aspects to making better decisions. Because we all start somewhere. Maybe you just got promoted and your boss used to do all this stuff, but they didn't write down how they did it. Or they left and you can't even ask them. And now you've got to figure it out. The first time, you have to make a really difficult call with no clear right answer. And the consequences could be significant and long-lasting for you and for other people. Because we all here, as engineering leaders, have the power to make work better and avoid those consequences for ourselves and our teams by making more informed decisions. And it's hard, but it's important. But there are some things we can do that can help us do it better. So here's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to look at some of the theory and the science behind making decisions, and then look at some practical tips. First, to see how to figure out if we can be decisive and if we can make a choice quickly, and then some tools to use when we need to make harder decisions. So let's dive in. I first got into this topic because I enjoy playing poker as a hobby. In the game of poker, a game of chance and skill, players must continually make decisions about how to play the hand they were dealt. If they consistently make bad decisions, they will lose the game, probably lose some money. I also enjoy reading, so I read some books about poker. One of these, by Annie Duke, explored the different models that some people use to make decisions and the factors that go into that. And this led into me reading more and more about our brains and the psychology of how they work. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, explained that we have two different ways of thinking, System 1, System 2, and we all have this System 1, System 2 thinking. System 1 is fast, automatic, instinctive. It provides very quick emotional responses. System 1 is what stops you walking into the road because you can hear traffic. System 1 thinking is associated with our amygdala, our fight or flight response. System 2 is slower. It's when our conscious reasoning kicks in. It's when we're being more rational. System 2 is about solving difficult problems when we've taken the time to understand what's happening around us and make a conscious choice about what to do next. And the more I read around this subject, the more it happened that I turned up to work the next day and I could see these ideas in action as me and my colleagues worked through problems together. And what became clear to me is that our decisions are based on our beliefs. So, sounds really basic, but I'm just going to make sure that we're all on the same page. We're going to go deep into what is actually happening in our brains when we make a decision. We're given a choice. Based on everything we know, we choose something. Hopefully, we get the outcome that we expected. This is the purest form of a decision, and it looks great in theory, but we're not in an ideal world. We probably don't know everything, because what's actually happening is more like this. We're given a choice, some other stuff happens. The first problem is that we don't control all the variables. If we had perfect knowledge, in theory, we could always make the perfect decision. But most of the time, we make decisions in an environment that we don't control completely. There might be factors that we didn't know at the time, or maybe things have changed afterwards. The second problem is that our decisions are based on our beliefs. And unfortunately, there is some bad news about the way we form beliefs. In addition to the rest of the world and other people getting in the way, the dice being rolled, we might not believe the things we do for the reasons we think we do. This means that beliefs that we hold that maybe we haven't recently examined very strongly could be informing our decision-making if we're not aware of it. Because we all have hidden biases, we all have blind spots. Even if we don't think we do, we do. We all filter everything through our own experiences and expertise, which leaves us with those blind spots. We can't get rid of them entirely, really, but we can learn to identify them and reduce the times in our lives that we need to rely on them. I'm not allowed to click. I'm legit not allowed to click. There we are, sorry. Because we like to think that we are these perfectly rational actors, and we form our beliefs by engaging our System 2 thinking, logically taking in all the relevant information and vetting it to discover the truth. But actually, this is what's really happening. System 1 often jumps in to pattern match. We all unconsciously prefer data which supports and reinforces our existing hypotheses. It's very easy to get set in our ways. Confirmation bias is a thing, right? Motivated reasoning is a thing. And our beliefs are very stubborn things. We want to think of ourselves as those rational actors, bringing our System 2 thinking into it, but the research shows otherwise. We don't often take the time to update our beliefs based on the new information. We want to think of ourselves as rational actors, but we are not always. Feelings come into it. Our System 1 thinking very easily causes us to make snap judgments. And that's where emotions can come into play, in an unhelpful way. Because the more we care about something, the harder it is to be objective, and the harder it is to take in new information that contradicts our existing beliefs. And the more comfortable it feels to leave them in place. There's one more theory about the psychology of decision-making that I want to share. It's more bad news, I'm afraid. Being smart makes it worse. That's annoying. Well, okay, fine, but what do I mean? Makes what worse? It makes it harder to recognize when your bias is creeping in. Being smart's great. You all know that. Being smart is all about effectively analyzing and processing information, parsing the quality of an argument and the credibility of its source. Right? Sure. But being smart can make bias worse. Because the smarter you are, the better you are at constructing a narrative that supports your existing beliefs. Smart people tell themselves better lies. And it's really hard to notice when this is happening. So that makes things a bit more difficult. Okay, bad news section, that's over, done with. No more bad news for today. So we've explored a bit about the psychology of how we make decisions and just some of the ways that System 1 thinking and cognitive bias and emotions can come into it. It's good to be aware of this. Knowing is not quite half the battle, but it's definitely a starting point. So how are we going to put this into practice? Well, the first thing to figure out is how much attention does your decision really need? I have definitely found myself agonizing over decisions which, in hindsight, may not have needed it. So if you're facing a tricky decision with multiple options and you're not really sure how to choose between them, and you don't even know really where to start or how much effort and time to put in up front choosing between them, here's something we can use to help us figure that out. Annie Duke came up with this concept of these 3 tests, the HOT tests. assuming that you have done some research and you've got a few options to choose from. H is for the happiness test. Will you be happy with your choice in a year? If the answer is yes, the decision passes the test. Think about this from your own perspective, but also that of your team. For example, a new project. If you're making a throwaway prototype, your choice here is going to be very different to if you're knuckling down to build a service that's going to last for years. O is for the only option test. If you have those multiple options to choose between, consider each one in turn on its own merits, without getting bogged down in comparisons. And each time, ask yourself, would you be happy if this was your only option? If you can answer yes, decision passes the test. T is for the two-way door test. Is this decision easily reversible? Can you get a do-over? If you walk through the door, can you walk back out of it to where you are now, easily and cheaply? If the answer is yes, decision passes the test. If you can answer yes to all three of these questions, you can be confident that you won't regret making this decision quickly. And you probably should do that. Don't worry about it too much. You can pick any of the options or just flip a coin. These tests are one way of avoiding that feeling of being stuck, of not being able to choose between options that are actually probably going to end up quite similar in their effect, even if not in the details. And recognizing these types of decisions and making them quickly will give you more time for decisions that aren't so simple. So you've done the hot tests, and you couldn't answer yes to all of the questions. That tells you that you shouldn't make a very quick decision. So what comes next? There are three parts to this. How to create that time and space to stop. Some ways to make difficult things easier to reason about, easier to think about. And some ways to learn from your experience when, inevitably, things don't go according to plan. Some decisions feel urgent. Perhaps somebody is waiting for an answer, or you're just busy with other work. But you've done the hot tests, and you know that you shouldn't just make a quick decision. That's the time that you need to create a stop and think moment. We saw how our psychology, our brains, and our emotions can hinder us from being objective. But we are squishy humans who have feelings. We can't help that. We can actually even bring our emotions into this in a helpful way. If I hear some evidence for a decision, I try to remember to ask myself, how does this make me feel? Do I feel vindicated or smug? Am I thinking, well, I knew that person was going to be trouble? Or do I feel anxious, angry, or afraid? Am I in denial, scrambling to find a reason to dismiss what I'm hearing? Am I immediately jumping to thinking, no, absolutely not. There is no way my report could be responsible for that. Honestly identify your feelings in that moment. They can be an indicator that you need to take a step back, create a stop and think moment, and reevaluate. Or just take a time out. In your team, make it okay for anyone to put their hand up and say, I'm not comfortable with this proceeding as it is. Can we pause this? It might be that you need to gather more information before you can come to a conclusion. It might be that you need to set aside time to have specific conversations about it because you need that back and forth. After seeing Amy's talk, I hope you who need to, will be able to say, hey, I need a time out. I've got a crippling period cramp. Can we come back to this in an hour? Because there aren't really that many decisions that must be made right now in a snap. And you're the leader now, so it's okay for you to show that sometimes you need to take some time to think about things and make it okay for others to do that too. So you've taken the time in the moment to notice your feelings, or you've put your hand up to say, time out, stop the line, we need to discuss this in more detail. Now you've created that time and space to think, to gather more information. What can you do to examine your beliefs? Here's some questions you can ask yourself or your team to really interrogate yourself and your beliefs to get more information. Questions you can ask to gather that all-important context that will help you make a better decision because you learned more about the environment you're operating in and the people around you. This examination of our beliefs is about becoming continuously and vigorously curious. We need to get in the habit of asking ourselves these questions about every new piece of information. And this is not the end of the list. This is just all I could fit on a slide. You can probably think of loads more different and better questions relevant to your particular situation. Did your decision fail the two-way door test because it wasn't reversible? In that case, think again. Is there a way you can make it reversible? We already do this with hiring. We have probation periods. Is there a way you can trial a new service or a new role in the team before committing to it for the longer term? At DXW, we've just introduced an initiative where we are enabling some of the engineers to become line managers. And we've set that explicitly up with a trial period, with checkpoints at various key stages, so that at any point, anyone on either side can back out and say, this is not working for me. And we say, okay, no harm, no foul. We've planned for that. Here's our backup plan. Show them the plan so that they believe that you have this no harm, no foul rule. And this idea has been really helpful for me. It's sort of like mental time travel, putting yourself forwards and backwards in time. So a few years ago, I was in a situation where it was the first time someone on my team had quit. And we were all very sad about it, because they are great. And in the moment, it felt like a bit of a surprise. But then when I looked back, I realized there had been rumblings, there had been questions from that person that should have set my spidey sense tingling and made me realize how unhappy they were. But I missed the signs. I didn't realize the situation was that serious. And afterwards, my manager said to me, do you know what, Nicky? This is the perfect time to ask ourselves, what would we have to have done before today, 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago, in order to not be in this situation right now? And that might not sound like it was very helpful in the moment, but it was, and it did prompt that reflection. And from then on, it prompted me to have that reflection earlier in all of my thinking. Because maybe in that case, it was the right time for that person to move on, and that's great for them. But also, maybe we could have made the changes that they needed. And what this taught me is that we can bring that reflection forwards. We don't have to wait for the bad thing to happen. We can plan ahead, visualize the future, pre-game it, and put ourselves in that situation ahead of time. But sometimes, you've already made what seems like a bad decision in hindsight. Perhaps you didn't call the time out, or you got rushed into something. And once you've done the cleanup and made it right, now's the time to learn from that. This is a mindset shift. Reframe wrong. Being wrong, or being told that you're wrong, feels bad. It feels like an attack on our identity. Remember that we want to think of ourselves as those rational actors. And if we think of our beliefs as 100% wrong or 100% right, and then something comes up that contradicts that, we only really have two options. One, we can make that big change to our identity. Hang on, I'm somebody who now believes the complete opposite of what I thought a moment ago. Or two, our smart intellect, System 1 kicks in and helps us discredit the new information. It's hard to change our minds. So often, we don't. So we need to get in that habit of examining our beliefs. And the more that we do that, the more that we find that being wrong is not always bad. It means you learned something. Now you have more information. Amy Edmondson is a professor of leadership at Harvard Business School, and she's got multiple degrees in organizational behavior, psychological safety, all that kind of good stuff. And she's written a book called The Right Kind of Wrong. And Amy shared this idea of intelligent failure. And the first time I heard this, I thought, well, this is kind of a weird idea. How can it be good to fail? Failing is not winning. Making mistakes feels bad. I'm trying to avoid the sinking feeling, remember? But Amy says, accepting failure doesn't mean accepting mediocrity. Because to experience intelligent failure, you have to be willing and able to engage in smart experiments. You have to do your homework. You have to think clearly about what might be possible, view the knowns and the unknowns. And then you're taking a smart risk. You hope it succeeds, of course, but it won't, often, because you're doing something new and ambitious, and you didn't have a crystal ball. And this made me realize, this is when I got that sinking feeling, when I was the wrong kind of wrong, when I needed to do my homework and I hadn't. And it's a bit weird, because nobody wakes up thinking, gosh, I hope I fail a lot today. But if we can make them intelligent failures, if we do our homework, if we stop and think, if we examine the accuracy of our beliefs, then we're setting ourselves up to be the right kind of wrong, to fail better. So what happens when we don't get the outcome we wanted? Well, if we think about making mistakes and intelligent failure and being wrong as ways of learning, then we can get to this place where we can realize that another bias might have just crept in. Hindsight bias. That means judging the result of a decision based on its outcome, not on the quality of the assessment that led you to make that choice. A bad outcome doesn't necessarily mean you made a bad decision. The dice is being rolled. We can't control every aspect of our environment. The flip side of this, of course, is that a good outcome doesn't necessarily mean you made a good decision either. The dice is being rolled. It might have been in your favor. This means we need to interrogate the process that led us to good outcomes just as much as we do when things don't go our way. But if we focus on the things we can control, if we've done our homework, we can be more confident that the outcome was due to something, a bad outcome was due to something that was not in our control. And we will still feel bad because we didn't get the outcome we wanted. And if the outcome affects other people, which it might, then we will probably feel even worse because we care and we are kind and we will own the result and do what we need to do to fix it. But we don't have to beat ourselves up about it because we know we followed the steps, we examined our beliefs, we did our homework, we didn't make quick decisions when we should have made slow ones. But regardless of whether we get the outcome we want or not, we must still always interrogate the decision-making process that led to it and document it. Write it down, what you're planning to do and what you think will happen, and then write down what did actually happen, and look back on it regularly, and it will become a record of your experiments, and you'll be able to fine-tune your future decisions and hopefully improve your success rate. So that's how to make hard decisions. Easy, right? We saw how to create space to stop and think, that we need to get in the habit of examining our beliefs so that when we are inevitably sometimes wrong, we don't have to feel defensive about it. But we can embrace a change of mind because it means we learn something. And we learned that we must analyze our successes as much as our failures because otherwise we'll never learn if it was our good decision-making or just chance that led to our good outcomes. So that's almost it for today. We've learned more about the psychology of decision-making, how our brains work, some of the cognitive traps it's easy to fall into. We've looked at how to make quicker decisions when we can, how to slow down and be vigorously curious, to get in the habit of interrogating our beliefs to get to the truth, to do our homework and view the possibilities, and whether we get the outcome that we want or not, to record them so we can increase the success of our predictions. And we should do these things because you're in these positions now. You've got to make the hard calls because we have the power to make work better. And it's hard, but it's important. So I hope you don't have to feel like you're scared of being on this roller coaster anymore, and instead you can enjoy it and make work and life less stressful for you and the people around you. Thank you for listening.